Priest Rian is a miracle healer who was able to save a dying priest from Cherkopia with just his breath. And it was to her that two travelers went. One of them was seriously ill. His companion was sure that if the priestess Rihanna took care of him, he would be able to live. Her touch was enough for the most incurable patient to recover. They approached the Temple of Remda. It was a very beautiful and majestic building. They were invited to enter. The healer Rihanna was considered to be the only such person. She was a very young and beautiful girl with huge eyes. It only took one look for her to realize the reason for the appeal. This time it was the centaur who needed help. Rihanna looked at him and saw that his heart was wounded and his arms were worn out. A scarlet thread ran through his entire body. The arrival explained that this was no simple injury. He had been attacked by a poisonous frog monster. His hands had taken on a blue hue. Rihanna examined the patient's hands carefully. Her unique feature was that she could see the scarlet threads. These were the threads of fate that stretched from Solar's star of life. These threads were the harbingers of death. The more a person was tied to the threads, the closer his death was. The scarlet threads cut into the body and activated the process of destruction of organs and tissues, resulting in death. And Rihanna was the only one who could see the scarlet threads. But she could not only see them, she could rid them of them. Although there was probably one other person in the world with the same ability. It's Saint Lucia, the heroine of a harem novel. It all started about 5 years ago. Rihanna then visited a doctor who told her to stay away from her smartphone because of a sudden eye disease. Then she had to get addicted to paper books. When the doctor noticed improvement, he allowed the bandages to be removed so Rihanna could live a normal life again. Suddenly, the girl looked at her hand and noticed that it was entangled by a scarlet thread. She had no idea what she was facing. A scarlet thread was tight around her wrist, just like in one of the novels she'd read recently. And she hadn't imagined it. Rihanna didn't know where the thread was leading her or where it would end, but she followed it as if she were being led. But suddenly an open trapdoor got in her way. The girl fell into it, and when she woke up she realized the world of the novel, the scarlet thread. Everything seemed just crazy, but it turned out to be reality. She's been in this world for 5 years now. She managed to adapt to everything and saved many lives. She has become known here as the miracle healer. Rihanna managed to rid the centaur of the scarlet threads. She promised that his skin would soon return to its normal color and his condition would improve. He didn't know what words of thanks to give her. The rumors about her healing were true. When Rihanna appeared in the world of the novel, she first thought she would have to play the role of Saint Lucia, as she was the only one who could see the scarlet threads in the book. But it wasn't like that. When Lucia came to this world, she was rescued by Asand. Rihanna, on the other hand, had been here 6 years before he woke up from his sorrow. Asande in the novel was the first man to whom Saint Lucia had fallen head over heels. In the novel, Lucia was constantly surrounded by strange men. After Asand, there was Cain, Abel, and 5 men in all. Only it wasn't like that with Rihanna. As soon as she entered this world, she was taken to the Temple of Remd and was going to be turned into a roast. But she was lucky enough to be saved by a fast-dying Blacopian priest. Rihanna had a hard time getting used to this world. The main characters were monsters, and it was hard to get used to them. The Blacopian priest that Rihanna had rescued offered to throw a feast in honor of her being in this world for 5 years. However, she couldn't eat monster food, so she decided to decline such a kind offer. The Cherkopian priest didn't mind letting her go home early, but she had to take home the dried frogs and blood-flavored jelly the priests had packed. And that was something Rihanna didn't want at all. She couldn't eat it. The Cherkopian priest, as well as many other inhabitants of this world, considered Rihanna a true treasure of the temple. Therefore, she shouldn't have refused to eat. Rihanna didn't mind eating a little extra, but not this kind of food. Rihanna couldn't stand it and ran away. She thought the priest was a very good spider indeed, but as soon as he opened his mouth, the chatter started. Rihanna had no accomplishments in her world. She was an ordinary girl, but despite that, she felt happy. In the novel world, she missed her family very much. She missed her mom and dad. One day, walking through the streets of a book city, she met someone who looked like a human, but she immediately realized that it was unlikely, and that it was just a monster. She stepped closer to him and thought, is he really dead? Scarlet threads braided all over his body. However, as long as that person was alive, Rihanna tried to free the man from the scarlet threads. It is worth noting that it is difficult to do this. The thing is that when she removes the threads, she feels all the pain of the person, and it's very difficult. She feels all the stabbing, cutting, and burning wounds. Rihanna has never ignored a dying life despite all her pain. She can't turn away and not help someone in need. Rihanna was able to free this young man from the scarlet threads. Now he would move on with his life. It was worth noting that every such rescue required a great deal of effort. She was getting very tired of it. Rihanna was glad that the deed was done and started for home. The Kakagu raft, which the priest Versebo had given her, was waiting for her. However, when she looked at her own hands, she saw that her wrist was braided with a scarlet thread. She was connected to someone she had recently saved. The scarlet thread was coming straight from his heart. Rihanna couldn't understand what was happening or who the person she had saved was. This was the first time such a situation had happened to her. There was a legend that if a scarlet thread connects to someone, that person will be destiny. But if that person dies, then the same thing happens to the person it is connected to. But she didn't want to be around someone she didn't know at all, and even a monster. So she ran away from him. Rihanna returned to the beautiful temple. Of course, her appearance was immediately noticed and cared for. She's been offered a drink of human blood that will help her fatigue in no time. But she would never touch that drink. She didn't get a break. A servant came to tell her that Rihanna was expecting a visitor. Who could it be? Some kind of monster, perhaps. But she had no such acquaintance. The servant said the visitor was incredibly handsome. Who could it be? If you remember the book, all the handsome guys were in Lucia's harem. Rihanna thought Asand himself had arrived. She went outside and saw a really handsome young man with red eyes. He stood stroking a tree. His eyes were so bright they looked more like blood. She remembered that there was indeed such a young man in the book and his name was Abel. But why did he show up here? Why is she connected to him? When Abel noticed Rihanna, he remembered that he had met her recently. She was the one who had saved him yesterday. She remembered the young man she had freed from the red threads yesterday. How could she not recognize that face? Now she could see why she had become bound by the red thread to this particular guy. He pulled out a knife and made just one movement. Rihanna was scared. She didn't want to die after all. She was the one who had saved his life yesterday. And here was gratitude. She saw red threads bursting out of his chest. Abel grabbed her palm and put it to his bleeding chest. And a miracle happened. The wound began to heal. Abel knew he wasn't mistaken. There was a real healer in front of him. He pulled her close to him and asked if she would go with him. In this book world, there were not only monsters but villains as well. And one of them was Nephilim. He was also fascinated by the beautiful Lucia, but he was considered the worst villain after the Dark Lord. He was good at pretense and hypocrisy when necessary, but he also had sudden outbursts of anger. Nephilim was a messenger of death. Hoping to gain immortality, he joined an alliance of villains and destroyed the temple. When Asand stabbed him right in the heart, he was defeated and became the most unfortunate character in the entire book. Rihanna looked at him and couldn't understand why he was here, why she had to go with him. Rihanna couldn't go with him as she was a priest of the temple, and she was so loath to trust her own fate to this man that she simply chose to run away. It was hard for her to believe that she would die according to the legend. For a long time she had to hide in the temple of Remda. She wanted more than anything to get home safe and sound. And to do that, she just had to wait for Lucia to do it. She shouldn't even go one step closer to Abel. But it wasn't that simple. Misfortune just haunted her all day long. It seemed as if someone wanted her dead. But each time it was Abel who was her salvation. How long can this go on? The whole point was that Abel could always sense when she was in danger. He pointed to her chest, which had been completely shattered last night, but it was perfectly fine now, and it's all thanks to her. Until now, no priest had been able to heal him so quickly and completely. Only Rihanna could. He remembered that Rihanna had mentioned the red thread last night, and he wanted to know more about it. But even if she didn't tell, she still had to go with him. If she stayed with him, she wouldn't have to worry about being eaten. He'll make sure she's safe. Rihanna didn't feel like going anywhere with the priest. She had to come up with an excuse to avoid it. But what would she have to come up with? After gathering her thoughts, she stated that she had a lifetime contract that she could not break. That was why she couldn't leave the temple. Abel looked at her and laughed. He said that wasn't an excuse and she should have told him everything earlier. To resolve the matter, Abel went to the priest. He informed her that he was taking her away. No one dared to contradict the death priest. Paz wanted to take it, well, let him take it even though it was valuable. Rihanna reminded the priest that she had saved his life. Could he just take her and betray her like that? The temple representatives wept as they bade her farewell, but in this situation they were powerless. In the end, they traveled to the Eternal Valley. The journey was difficult and long. Rihanna cried periodically. She thought she just wouldn't get to the right place, so much so that Abel was in a hurry. When they got to the right place, they were met by a skeleton. He greeted Abel. Rihanna had never seen a living skeleton before, and it was scary. Abel called a meeting. He introduced Rihanna as his woman. If anyone tried to touch her, the creature's bones would shatter. All those present understood at once. After the meeting, Abel and Rihanna left. They went to the chambers where they decided to talk. Abel wanted to know more about the connection between her and Rihanna. He wondered what would happen if the owner of the heart died. Rihanna said that death awaited the other then, but immediately tried to take back what she said. Abel leaned over to her and reminded her that she was very worried about her own death. So there is a connection between the two hearts. Rihanna noted that Abel looked so different from the character in the book. Perhaps she had remembered something wrong. Abel continued his interrogation. He was curious to understand how the girl knew he was going to die. He hovered over her, frightening and mesmerizing her at the same time. She was desperate, for Abel was very handsome. But if she told him the truth, he could hardly believe it. What could she think of to get away from here? According to legend, the three goddesses of fate could control the direction of the red threads, and Abel must have known that. Rihanna cried out that she was joined to him by a single thread of destiny. The night she saved him, the goddess of fate bound them with a red thread. So if she dies, he dies too, or vice versa, which means he can't just take her and kill her. That's why she asks him to take her back to Rem's temple, where she can still live peacefully and safely. Abel thought about what Rihanna had said, but in a situation like this, he certainly couldn't just let her go, and besides, he needed her healing power. He wasn't immortal. He pulled out a knife, made a fairly deep cut on his arm, and approached her. Rihanna was frightened. She had thought her trick would work, telling him that if she died, he would die too. But he didn't want to hurt her or do anything about it. He just wondered, if what she said was true, didn't it mean that if he died, she would die too? It but could only be a one-way connection. Shouldn't she do everything she can to save him? He took her hand and pressed it to his wounded one. He didn't know how much she knew about him, but his heart is hidden where no one can ever find it, and what's in his chest is a common fake. You can poke it many times, it still won't die. The wound on his arm began to fade. If you stab it with a knife, it leaves a bleeding wound. The healing powers of ordinary priests are useless to him. But Rihanna was different. There was no one else besides her who could heal wounds so skillfully, and that's why she is the real perfect partner for him. She looked at him thinking how different he was from the hero of the novel. What should she do? Another man appeared who called himself Cain. He was the second man who interested Lucia. Cain kindly offered to escort Mrs. Rihanna to her room. Cain and Abel were faithful friends and companions. She knew that Cain would have to die first. There were thick scarlet threads coming out of Cain's heart, which were the harbingers of his imminent death. In the book, Cain was incredibly in love with Lucia. He was willing to sacrifice his own life for her, but he was never able to tell her how he felt. Rihanna liked Cain more than the other characters in the novel. She imagined how he would look if he had white wings behind him. He would probably be especially handsome then. It was deep into the night. Everyone in the castle was asleep, including Rihanna. She slept sweetly and serenely, but her sleep was disturbed by Abel. First he whispered to try to wake her up, but nothing worked. Then he shouted in her ear. How could she not wake up? Abel came to her on business. He ripped the clothes over his chest. Rihanna noticed again the many scarlet threads bursting out of his body. Abel was injured. Abel was seriously wounded and his body ached, which was why her help was needed. Rihanna laid him down and began to perform manipulations. She noticed that he was badly hurt as there was a lot of blood, so she had to do a lot of work on him. While Rihanna was working on him, Abel didn't stop talking. He was always saying something or asking something. He wondered why she had saved him that night. She could have just walked past him, and if she had, she wouldn't be tied to him by the threads of fate. But Rihanna was a very responsible girl, and healers are supposed to help those in need. Abel gave thanks for another rescue. He realized that Rihanna wasn't happy about it. He thought everything that was happening to them was amazing in itself. He drank wine and asked why she wasn't afraid of him. Rihanna was afraid, however, because he was a reaper. Abel was about to leave. There was nothing and no one to hold him back. Rihanna was the only one who didn't like the rush because the healing wasn't finished yet. He had important things to do, though, and he couldn't laze around any longer. One of the army commanders came to Abel to report the situation. He gave some disappointing news. The morale of the fighters was low, and the barrier was unstable. Rihanna heard the whole conversation, but she didn't understand what was being said. But then she thought that now she was in the Temple of Death, and Abel wouldn't be able to hold a certain number of dead souls if he didn't bind them. He has to hunt for souls every day, and that leads to injuries, and she has to treat him literally on the verge of exhaustion. Rihanna's own thoughts tried to keep to herself. She thought that they were probably trying to push his boundaries to gain strength for a rebellion, so they shouldn't be trusted. After hearing the report, Abel thought he had no choice. In the evening, he would have to go for a new soul to get stronger soldiers. Rihanna decided to intervene in this conversation. She raised her hand to be noticed, but they were still discussing business. She finally mustered up the courage to say that the Lord had not yet recovered from the wounds he had received yesterday. In addition, several wounds need to be healed. He probably looks healthy on the outside, but in reality, his internal organs are seriously damaged. When the Lord's man left, Abel wondered why Rihanna had said all that. It wouldn't have been better for her if he hadn't been here. Rihanna threw a sad look at him and said if he left, he would be hurt again, and she really didn't want him to feel that pain. But Abel wasn't the type to listen to anyone. Despite her words, he got up and went hunting. She had no choice but to admonish him. She asked him not to hurt himself this time. Rihanna lay down and looked at her hand, bound with red thread. Every time she treated it, she tried to rub the red thread where the heart was, hoping to get rid of it. But it wouldn't go away. Why wouldn't it go away? The answer to that question came all by itself. Rihanna jumped in her seat. Abel himself had said that he had a false heart in his chest. That was the reason why she couldn't get rid of the thread. But it turns out that the thread is actually attached to his real heart. Then she'd have to find his real heart to be free. The thought made her so happy that Rihanna started to dance. But where can it be found? It must be hidden somewhere in the temple. After all, the safest place for a Reaper of Death is his own temple. Rihanna began to tiptoe around the temple. The first thing to do was to search his room. There might be some sort of secret safe in there. She opened the door and stared in horror at what she saw. There was a lot to stare at in shock. Abel was on the floor of the room bleeding. She tried to lift him, but she couldn't do it on her own. He was too heavy. But Rihanna hoped he would be able to get up on his own and walk to the room. Abel apologized to her for being hurt again. He looked very bad indeed. Rihanna managed to lay him down to examine him. The scarlet threads were excessive. Rihanna realized that his body was simply disintegrating. She really wanted to ask about where his real heart was hidden. But how could she do that when Abel was too bad? She couldn't let him suffer so much. She had many methods in her armory to cure, and one of them was radiance. Rihanna used it. It must be said that the result was very good. She had treated all the visible wounds, but the treatment was not yet complete. She promised to treat the remaining ones tomorrow. Abel squeezed her hand tightly. He didn't want to be alone. Rihanna thought he'd been crazy to go there. Abel lay down again. Rihanna noted that his breathing was heavy. He must have been in a lot of pain, though. She couldn't leave him in such a serious condition, so she hugged him and promised that she would stay with him today. She scrutinized the decoration of the room and wondered where she should sleep. Abel was in his bed. She spotted a chair that might be a good place to sleep, but Abel was ahead of her. He tugged her to him and laid her down beside him. He liked her warmth. She didn't like all of this. First, she'd been just a medicine cabinet to him, and now she was a dakimakura, his big pillow. She could feel his breath on her neck, and it was warm even though Abel was a reaper. Abel hugged her tightly in her sleep. Rihanna knew that all of Abel's loved ones had died, and that he had not become Lord of the Temple by choice. Abel does love Lucia very much indeed, all because she was immortal. And she wasn't bound to him by a scarlet thread. Lucia was the one person Abel loved and she couldn't die. Rihanna wondered if she was immortal too. The thought made her jump up on the bed. Abel felt it and immediately woke up. He thought she was uncomfortable. He was still afraid that he would walk away and disappear. Rihanna touched him and felt that he was on fire. It was as if his body was on fire. He pressed her hand to his cheek, as if afraid to let go. Rihanna promised she wouldn't leave him, but she needed to get a wet towel, but that would require him to let go of her hand. Rihanna was sure that the one who could save him, Lucia, would come soon. In the meantime, she would stay with him and heal him. The next morning, Lord Abel's servant entered the room. He brought him breakfast, but what he saw shocked him. He saw Lord Abel and Rihanna sleeping peacefully. The news immediately spread throughout the temple. Rihanna's treatment was clearly doing him good because he started joking. He said that it had been a long time since he had had such a wonderful night, after which he felt so well. Rihanna didn't like these jokes. Rihanna was still in his room. Breakfast was served to her. Lord Abel sat and took care of business. Rihanna jumped up at him. It was good that he was busy working and not hunting, but why was she still here? He looked at her very tenderly and said he wished he could be with her. The next day, Abel was still sitting at the table, minding his own business. He didn't go hunting again. Rihanna thought it was because of her. Eventually, she got tired of being cooped up. It gave her a headache. She was desperate for fresh air, so she decided to go for a walk. Rihanna stepped outside and walked down the forest path. There was silence all around. I wonder why. Could it have something to do with Abel and his recent hunt? Since he was always in the temple, perhaps a riot could be avoided. But then she heard the forest dwellers talking. They were talking about Abel and her. Rumor had it that the Lord was in love. That's why he hadn't been on any hunts lately. She didn't like what she heard and ran away. She couldn't run for long, however. She stopped to catch her breath. She had been dizzy a lot lately, and after she'd cured Abel, the headaches were getting worse. Back at the castle, she decided to start studying. She would have to find out how to ease the pain, because if she got sick, no one would be able to heal her. Abel noticed that Rihanna was reading a medical book. He thought she was secretly treating someone. He had asked her not to treat anyone else but him. Rihanna said she was the one who needed the treatment. She is not Abel's personal first aid kit. She pointed her finger somewhere to the side and suggested he go play with the other girls. He glared at her with his red eyes. Had someone said something to her? But she decided to assure everything is not like that. It's just that Abel is very handsome in his own right and is probably a favorite with the female sex. Maybe she's just jealous. Well, what else could he think? He leaned a little closer to her. Shouldn't people be jealous in a case like this? Rihanna looked at him surprised with her beautiful big eyes and said no. Why should she feel jealous? That question offended Abel somewhat. Surely it would please him if Rihanna were jealous. Rihanna went to the library to return the book. The librarian here was a skeleton. They were everywhere, though. Another skeleton appeared in the library. He was looking for the girl and couldn't find her anywhere. What's the emergency? The skeleton dragged her towards the main temple. There was a wounded man there who urgently needed help. He was in a very bad condition, and there were many scarlet threads coming out of his body. Rihanna looked at him and realized that she had never seen anything like this before. She began the healing manipulations. The creature she was working on was in great pain. She remembered Abel's words that she should only treat him. But she was a real healer, and she couldn't turn her back on someone who really needed help. However, something went wrong and she fainted. Abel was immediately informed of what had happened. He tried to find out from the servants what had happened. They said that one of the soldiers was seriously injured. They turned to her for help. Rihanna started to treat and suddenly fainted. Abel was very angry. He promised that if Rihanna didn't wake up, his subjects would never see the light of day again. He would kill every last one of them. He immediately rushed over to her. Rihanna was lying on the bed. It looked like she was just sleeping. She thought about the scarlet thread while she was asleep. She asked herself what would happen to Abel if she died like that. A little time passed and she woke up. Only Abel didn't see it. He was scolding his servant and demanding that he do something. When she called out to him, Abel immediately turned at her voice. He grabbed her hands and started asking if she was okay. She was fine. Abel picked her up and held her tightly against him. He was really worried about her. He was afraid she would be gone. And that gesture spoke his worries without words. He brought her hot tea straight to her bed and proceeded to question her. Rihanna told me that always when she heals others, she feels their pain. Yes, then it is gradual, but during the healing there is pain just as much as the one she heals. Abel couldn't even imagine such a thing. He regretted that she hadn't told her secret earlier. Rihanna had been hiding her own pain the whole time. She sat in silence as there was nothing to answer. She hated the fact that Abel thought she was stupid. She didn't like the fact that Abel thought she was stupid, but she thought he was stupid, at least in the novel. The next day, Rihanna went for a walk. She kept remembering yesterday's events and Abel's words about being afraid for her. And his embrace had been very unexpected. Outside, she met Kane, whose body was streaked with scarlet threads. Perhaps he had been wounded. His wounds were deep, but it seemed like Kane just didn't notice them. Rihanna noted that even in that state, he was smiling serenely, as if he was remembering something good. Rihanna remembered his story. Kane had lost his family during Lord Asan's mission. There had been an accident caused by Abel back then. And despite that, Kane hadn't turned his back on Abel. He is still his friend and comrade. And who knows how he feels being in this temple. He may be in great pain. Rihanna wanted to touch him, but Kane was against it. He didn't want Abel to find out. Rihanna had seen how much pain he was in. But Kane remembered that Rihanna had been unconscious for days after she had healed someone. And he wouldn't want that to happen again, because Abel had been very worried then. Rihanna didn't like this talk about Abel. In fact, it wasn't so much about Abel as it was about her. Rihanna couldn't get past people who needed help. Rihanna started the treatment. It went very quickly, which surprised Kane. He made her laugh by saying that even the skeleton captain appreciated her abilities. But Rihanna supposed it was no big deal. Her laughter was heard by Abel. He had never seen or heard her laugh before, so he naturally wondered what had caused it. Abel realized that Rihanna was not himself. He saw Kane. With one tug, he hoisted Rihanna onto his shoulder and carried her. Abel promised that if she came near Kane again, he would kill her. But who? Rihanna frowned. How could he say something like that? Abel knew perfectly well that if he killed her, he would soon die himself. The threat was not directed at her, however, but at Kane. Rihanna looked at him and thought, what a strange relationship between them. Abel brought her to some new place. Rihanna looked around but couldn't figure out where she was. Abel wanted to show her something. He pulled out a box and opened it. The light was so bright that Rihanna had to squeeze her eyes shut to keep from going blind. His real heart was hidden in that box. Rihanna realized that the scarlet thread was leading to him. Abel said he'd die if he laid a finger on that heart. Turns out he was only half immortal. Rihanna began to remember what was written in the novel. It said that Abel was born with a cursed heart. It had been torn from his body by the red thread of the sun. Abel really wanted to become immortal, which is why he was obsessed with Lucia. Rihanna's own life was tied to his cursed heart. If she broke the knit now, she could escape. But of course, she couldn't do that because of her moral principles. Rihanna said that Abel would soon meet someone who would help solve his problem. She will stay with him until Lucia comes and makes him immortal. After that, she'll definitely go home. At least that's what you have to believe. Abel looked at her carefully. If everything she said was true, why hadn't he met this man before now? He realized that she was eagerly waiting for his savior, because that way she could leave him. He thought she was just using him in this situation. But he trusted her. Even showed her his real heart. But Rihanna was of a different opinion. She thought that if anyone was using anyone, it was him using her, not the other way around. Abel stood and recalled his own feelings. In the beginning, he had actually thought of her as a useful person. After all, she was the one who had been able to get him back on his feet even though he was seriously injured, and now it was different. and it pissed him off. She could see that he was extremely angry, only she couldn't understand why. She offered him a compromise. She would help fulfill his wish for him to become immortal, and he would in turn protect her. Was that really all and nothing more was needed from him? Rihanna didn't realize what else he had to offer. He clutched his head and wondered if she had any feelings for him. He leaned his hand against his chest, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he turned and walked away. Rihanna stared after him and wondered what he wanted from her. Why couldn't he just say it outright? Rihanna's calm was broken. One of Abel's men ran into the room. He was clearly frightened and asked that she stop Abel. If he continued, the temple would soon collapse. She looked at the messenger with consternation but followed him. What she saw really scared her. She had never seen Abel in such a state before. He was covered in blood and was trashing everything around him. He was simply destroying everything he had done before. He had collected souls with sweat and blood, and now he was destroying everything with his own hands. He almost killed her too, but Cain saved her. She noticed that Abel was covered in blood, and it alarmed her. But Abel didn't seem to notice anything around him. He wasn't going to ask her for healing. Cain tried to reason with him, but Abel saw and heard nothing around him. Then Rihanna had to take a desperate step. She pulled a bow from one of Abel's men, drew the bowstring, and took aim. How could she stop him? However, something went wrong and Rihanna hurt her finger. Immediately, blood started dripping from it. The Temple of Death was a special place. It was home to creatures that reacted to the smell of fresh blood, and as soon as they smelled it, they began to surround Rihanna. Abel naturally could not leave her alone. He wasn't just a reaper. He had wings behind his back and could fly. So he lifted Rihanna easily and took off. She was scared. She was afraid she would fall. But Abel told her to just hold still and then nothing bad would happen. He went back to the castle with her. But he didn't go in through the door. He went in through the window. He put her gently on the bed and went to get some kind of potion. Rihanna didn't understand why there was such a fuss over a simple scratch. He gave her a potion and ordered her to swallow it. It was an antidote. The fact was that the bow and arrows of Nefer, the creature from whom she had taken the bow, were impregnated with frog poison. She looked at him and saw that he was worried. Rihanna thought to herself that she was from another world, so neither poisons nor Solar's powers would work on her, but she preferred not to say anything about that. He decided to examine her. Her veins were not swollen, which was a very good sign. Abel clutched his head. Everything was really pissing him off and annoying him. He thought that as soon as they'd met, everything had started to go to hell. Rihanna offered to lie down beside him, but she didn't take into account one thing. Abel's whole body ached from the many abrasions. He couldn't lie next to her. However, he was able to pull her down and hover over her. He really didn't like her carelessness. Rihanna didn't want to ask anything at first, but she didn't hold back. In doing so, she blushed as red as a gourd. She asked if he liked her. Oh, better she didn't ask that, as his reaction answered that question. She even got scared and started to say she had to heal him first. But Abel wanted something else. Rihanna made an effort then and laid Abel down on his shoulder blades. That way, she could examine his body thoroughly. She gently groped his body, and she got to the bottom. What she saw made her blush. Abel got angry and kicked her out. Rihanna stepped out. She was horrified to think that Abel was a man. Abel's servants heard all this. Cain was an excellent horseman. His horse could ride over all kinds of heights and obstacles. On the street, he spotted Rihanna, who was heading somewhere. He asked her what she was doing. Rihanna loved his warm smile. It always had a calming effect on her. He asked about the condition of her arm. Rihanna noticed the horse and asked who it was. Cain didn't have an ordinary horse. His name was Sleipnir. His speciality was that instead of 4 legs, he had 8. It was Odin's horse. Cain kindly offered her a ride on it, and Rihanna accepted. She had never seen such a creature before. The horse's mane reminded her of flames, and it was real, but they didn't burn living things. Rihanna touched the horse. It gave her a pleasant sensation. The mane felt very soft and pleasant to the touch. Eventually, Rihanna even snuggled up to the animal. After returning from her walk, Rihanna walked to her room, settled down on her bed, and started reading. Abel entered the room. She didn't even notice his presence. This silence was especially infuriating to him. He apologized for what had recently happened and simply asked me to forget the situation. Rihanna looked at him and thought how charming Abel was. He made her realize what a kiss was. Abel thought she had stopped looking in his direction, as all thoughts were occupied with the other man. Could it have been Nefer? But we know there was no other man. Abel took her silence as an answer, so he clenched his fists and threatened to find him. To stop the scandal, Rihanna said it was about her cat. But Abel didn't take it. He still threatened to find him and kill him. Rihanna said it wouldn't work anyway because he wasn't in this world. Maybe he was dead, but Rihanna didn't know anything. The last time she'd seen him was 5 years ago. Abel asked her to describe him. He could see if the cat was alive or not. Rihanna told him that he had black fur, only the end of his tail and his paws were white. He also had an obnoxious temper, but he never let on that he was sad. Abel did something that made Rihanna's cat appear on the table. It was alive, so it didn't move completely. The girl immediately cuddled her pet. It was obvious how much Rihanna loved the cat and missed him. Abel suggested maybe killing him so he could always be near her. But clearly, she didn't like that idea. The cat liked Abel so much that he jumped on him and started rubbing him, purring softly a cat song. But the cat couldn't stay here for long because it was a living creature. Such creatures had no place in a temple of death. In any case, Rihanna was grateful for the opportunity to see her dear creature, even if only for a few moments. While they were chatting sweetly, they were being watched. Many people didn't like the fact that they had to serve a demigod, so action was needed. And now was a good time for them, because Abel was distracted by Rihanna. Rihanna lay in bed and thought how strange things were getting. When Abel left at night, she always felt irritated and couldn't sleep, and the silence in Abel's absence sometimes killed her. While enjoying her rest, Rihanna heard some noise. She decided to see what was going on. The intruders sneaked into the temple to find Abel's real heart. They knew where it was. Rihanna stood there out of breath as she continued to listen to their plans. One of the intruders smirked and said that if the heart was destroyed, Abel would become a half-dead lord and then there would be no use for him. Rihanna realized there was going to be a rebellion. It was mentioned in the novel itself. However, we must not stand by and wait. We must protect Abel's heart and get ahead of the intruders. If Abel dies, she will follow him. Rihanna opened the door with difficulty, and she found what she was looking for, the box in which Abel's heart was hidden. However, suddenly zombies appeared in the room. They were also looking for the heart. Rihanna lurked behind a rock. As they looked around the room, Rihanna decided to run away. She couldn't let them be so treacherous to Abel. However, the zombies had pretty good hearing. They realized that there was someone else in the room with him, and only saw Rihanna running away. They chased, for they couldn't let the enemy get away. Rihanna hid behind a column. She stood there without moving. However, the zombie had poor eyesight, so she managed to escape unnoticed. Finding her way out and opening the door, she ran into Abel's submissives. The chief of them noticed what Rihanna was holding. Naturally, he gave the order to grab her. Rihanna ran as fast as she could. She saw that there were too many rebels. How Abel could survive this hell was a mystery. But a sudden rescue came. The horse Sleipnir, on which she had recently ridden with Cain, appeared before her. Rihanna told of the planned uprising and asked to be rescued, as it was unlikely she would be able to get out of the situation herself. However, the pursuers were right there. They tried to warn Sleipnir to stay as far away from the girl as possible, as she had stolen Lord Abel's heart and was now trying to escape with him. Rihanna screamed that it was all a brazen lie, and if someone wanted to steal the heart, it wasn't her, it was them. She could hear perfectly well what they were talking about in the corridor. Sleipnir told her to calm down. He stood on his haunches and said that the master cared for her more than anyone else, so it would be up to him to decide who was right in this situation. Sleipnir took Rihanna, but the opponents decided not to give up. Their leader shouted that if Sleipnir did not give them the girl, he would be a traitor. But Sleipnir didn't care at all. He sprang to his feet. Riding Sleipnir was amazing. Rihanna was breathtaking. However, the opponents were not willing to back down. They didn't want to lose the middle ground. Rihanna was worried about them getting caught. On the contrary, he tried to reassure her and told her he was doing his best. Suddenly, Rihanna felt someone's hand reaching for her. It was very scary. She ended up riding Sleipnir unsteadily. Sleipnir was forced to land. Luckily, Rihanna wasn't hurt in the fall, and the most important thing was that she held the heart box. The opponents were just around the corner. Rihanna didn't know what to do. She sat and held the box tightly to her chest, and they kept coming and demanding that she give up her heart. Lord Abel himself appeared in the clearing and demanded an explanation. Stalker decided to take the lead and immediately stated that they were busy chasing the thief who stole his heart. Abel turned to her and asked if it was true. He demanded an answer, but she stood silent. The opponents added fuel to the fire by pointing out that she was holding the same box. They shouted that they had seen everything with their own eyes, and Rihanna was blatantly lying. Rhett grabbed her hand and stared into her eyes, as if trying to read the answer in them. He was literally asking for her to say no. Let her just say she wasn't trying to get away from him. Rihanna finally replied that no. In fact, her plan was to make him immortal. She was trying to protect his heart as they set their sights on him. Opponents screamed that she was blatantly lying to him, and she was the one trying to run away with his heart. The Lord really trusted her. He asked her to tell the creatures the weapon pointed to that she hadn't run away. She had to repeat it loud and clear for everyone to hear. Everyone who slandered her flinched. Rihanna shouted she wasn't running away. She would never do that, and there wasn't even a thought of such a thing. Abel smiled and asked if it was true. Rihanna confidently replied that yes, she did. The ringleader shouted with all his might. He didn't understand how the Lord could talk like that, for the girl had really stolen his heart. Abel said that sometimes you have to take someone's word over physical evidence, so some man's words the Lord put above those of his subjects. There was no other way out. The leader of the servants raised his sword and pointed it at Abel. One of the skeletons shouted that this was unheard of insolence. No one has the right to raise a sword against Lord Abel. But the one who raised his weapon did not hear any reasonable arguments. He threatened the skeleton. He had better get out of the way, or he would be in trouble. He didn't put his sword away but continued speaking. It was said that Lord Abel's fate was closely linked to this woman. If he starts just torturing her, the Lord himself will die from the pain. Howley's head lit up with an unkind fire. The most daring ordered to capture the woman and kill her first. That way they can defeat the Lord. But apparently he didn't realize who he was messing with. Of course, Lord Abel couldn't stand by and do nothing. He drew his formidable weapon and swung. The first heads flew from his shoulders. Then the opponent drew his sword and lunged at Rihanna. Fortunately, Cain came to their rescue. He was able to stop the attempted attack. Lord Abel's orders were to take Rihanna and get out of here with her. Rihanna didn't want to leave Lord Abel alone. She tried to resist the decision, but Abel said it was out of the question and had to be done as soon as possible. She couldn't help him here anyway. Cain grabbed Rihanna and tried to pull her away from the scene, but the girl resisted. Abel decided to remind them that if anything happened to Rihanna, Cain would be responsible. In that case, he would be the first to lose his head. Cain understood perfectly well. Cain sat Rihanna down on Sleipnir. It was important that she hold on tight. Rihanna made one last plea to Abel to come with them. She really couldn't leave him alone and was worried. Cain tried to reassure her. He was sure Cain would be all right. Rihanna held the box containing Abel's real heart tightly. She knew that as long as it was intact, the Lord was safe. Rihanna remembered what the actual novella had said. It said that Abel had barely managed to escape. He was almost at the mercy of his own death. Alas, their escape was also difficult. They were surrounded by a ring of flying creatures, impossible to break through. But Cain had a plan. He jumped off Sleipnir's back. Rihanna worried that there were too many of them, and that Abel wouldn't be able to handle them alone. But behind Cain's back, beautiful white wings opened. Rihanna remembered that they were the mark of a celestial. Cain asked Sleipnir to get Rihanna away as soon as possible. She realized that the events were no longer the same as in the book. In the work, Cain had to show his nature in front of Lucia, not in front of an army of opponents. It was different now. Sleipnir led Rihanna away. He reassured her as best he could, for he knew that his master and Cain had never been weak. However, she was still very much worried. Rihanna realized that they really weren't weaklings, but could feel pain. She held the heart box tightly with her hand, but she could feel the pain Abel was feeling right now. Rihanna looked back and saw no sign that they were being chased. She thanked Sleipnir for his help. He had really done a lot. Rihanna, with tears in her eyes, asked Sleipnir to come back. She couldn't leave Cain and Abel behind. She had made a promise to the latter that she would not run away again, and now she was breaking it. Strangely enough, Sleipnir heeded her pleas. He knew the shortest way to the temple and took it. Rihanna was really asking him to run faster, but Sleipnir was already doing his best. At last, the temple showed itself. Abel was still fighting the enemy. Rihanna jumped off Sleipnir and ran towards him. But the enemies continued to be here. Their leader threw a ball of energy at her. Abel immediately rushed to her and covered her with his wing. He managed to shield her from the deadly blow. But the enemy is clearly in trouble. His subjects watched with fear at what Abel had done to him. Abel was angry with her. He told her to run away, but she did not listen and came back. Rihanna looked at him and almost cried, saying that she had promised never to leave him. But the battle was not yet over. Those who were still allies of Abel suggested that he leave the place. They could hold back the enemy themselves. But the Lord had no intention of running. The rebel leader was not finally killed, but very badly wounded. But he was not going to give up until the last and released the poison towards Abel. Succeeded in capturing him. He thought she was dead. However, the poisons had no effect on her, so she was fine. Abel clutched her tightly in his arms. He was extremely angry about the whole situation and wished he could kill everyone. Rihanna asked him not to watch his temple being destroyed. Sleipnir, who had witnessed all the events, then recounted what had happened. Abel's body released a large amount of power. Because of this, the souls supporting the temple immediately disappeared. Abel was too badly wounded. His body was covered in blood and entangled in scarlet threads. Rihanna sat beside him. She kept checking for breath, but there was none. The bleeding didn't stop either. She remembered the box containing his heart and decided to look at it. Abel's real heart was also entangled with scarlet threads. Rihanna thought regretfully, if Lucia had been in her place, things would have ended differently. Rihanna leaned over to him and began to apologize. She felt guilty as she had intruded into the whole thing. If it wasn't for her, he might still be alive. And he had given up a lot for her. She even kissed him. And a real miracle happened. He opened his eyes, but Rihanna didn't see it as she had fallen asleep. When she woke up, she saw Abel alive. He was making a fire. She couldn't contain her feelings and ran into his arms. How glad she was that he was alive. But as Abel himself had said, he was only alive because of her. In fact, she had saved him this time. She started asking what happened to Cain. She'd asked him to look after Abel if he'd run away. Cain showed his essence to the monsters. He couldn't go back to the Lord until he had tracked down all the opponents. But once he had dealt with everything, he would return for them. Rihanna asked Abel to return to the village where she used to live, and he agreed to it. Everyone was very happy to have her back. However, no one expected her to return, not by herself but with Abel. The priest had worried that the Lord was here to gather souls in the temple. However, Abel had no such plans. He was angered by the question. Sleipnir had completed his task and delivered them to their location. Now he could go. Abel and Rihanna inquired about the place where he would be staying. However, Sleipnir was not demanding. He could survive anywhere. Sleipnir rode off. Our heroes were sorry to part with him. Rihanna noticed that they were in a clearing with flowers. But they weren't regular flowers, they were dusky flowers. They were usually given at a wake. It didn't put them in a good mood. Rihanna offered to go inside. She was glad to be able to lie down on her favorite bed again. It felt so good to lie on it. Abel, however, took the offer literally and also lay down next to her. He liked her bed too. But Rihanna didn't like it, so she offered him a seat on the sofa, but he resisted. Rihanna pulled out the box containing Abel's heart, but he offered to keep it. Only why? Because the heart belonged to him. But he did trust her. Besides, if anyone knew who had his heart, Rihanna would be in danger. In your place, it can be safely hidden under the mattress. Abel was pensive and Rihanna noticed it. She thought he couldn't go home now that the house had been destroyed. Rihanna took his hand and looked straight into his eyes. However, their idyll was broken by a knock on the door. Rihanna went to see who it was and saw Persephone. He was agitated because he had heard rumors that Rihanna had hurt herself badly. He brought her healing herbs with anti-inflammatory properties. He also brought her kakadu berries, which she loved very much. Abel came out and hugged Rihanna. Persephone looked at him with all his eyes. He didn't know that Rihanna hadn't come back on her own. Persephone was stunned at first, but then decided to be friendly. He greeted Rihanna's guest and introduced himself. Persephone was the spirit of the pine tree and Rihanna's friend. He extended his hand to Abel for a handshake. Abel also held out his hand to him in return. But there was smoke when they touched. Rihanna examined Persephone's hand carefully. Abel had accidentally burned it. It only took a glance at Abel to realize that he didn't like all this. So Persephone decided to leave for his own safety. He ran away like a coward. Looking at Abel, one could guess that everything was no accident. Rihanna wanted to understand why he had done this to the boy. He had come because he was worried about her. At first, Abel pretended not to know what she was talking about, but then he said he didn't like it. It turns out that Abel thought Rihanna was just flirting. He didn't want her to be friends with anyone else but him, and he didn't want her to care about anyone else. He also really didn't like it when she was in pain. I think she understood him. She shouldn't get hurt again, but he must promise not to get hurt again. Persephone is back. He forgot to tell Rihanna about the party. She and Abel had been invited to it. But Abel didn't like it. He didn't plan to meet or talk to people like them, so he resisted with all his might. But Rihanna insisted that he go. She knew that there were good creatures there, and Abel was sure to like them too. Abel eventually gave up. He couldn't let Rihanna go alone. When they got to the party, everyone was happy to see Rihanna. They began to raise their cups and drink to her successful return. One said he never expected to see her again, as it was rumored that she had been taken by the demon himself. All the creatures of this world were grateful to her. Rihanna had saved many lives. Sleipnir noted that Rihanna was very popular with the villagers. He thought that normally humans could only be fodder for monsters, but Rihanna managed to survive among them. And on top of that, she had a good relationship with them, which was incredible. Sleipnir and Abel watched the fun. Rihanna was not just a human, they thought. Her place was indeed in this temple. Abel thought sadly that the only villain in this world was him. He was the one who'd taken the one who'd been doing well in this world and tortured her in the new one. Rihanna walked over to Abel and offered him a dance. But apparently he'd never had to dance before. Rihanna told and showed him how cool and easy it was. It was the traditional dance of the village of Remda. Abel scrutinized her face and thought she looked happy. They twirled in a beautiful dance and she was very happy indeed. Rihanna looked up at the sky. It was all covered in stars. It was a very beautiful sight. She put her arms around Abel's neck and wondered if it wasn't beautiful. But Abel didn't know. Everything was ugly to him. But then he confessed there was something he thought was really beautiful. Rihanna started to question him, but Abel didn't answer. They went home. Rihanna was very tired and climbed into bed almost immediately. When she fell asleep, Abel confessed that only she was beautiful to him. He stroked her cheek. She was especially beautiful when she danced. It's a beautiful new sunny day. Rihanna's awakening was not a good one. Her head was throbbing wildly. The first person she saw was Abel. He was standing there covering something, with black smoke visible behind him. It looked like he was trying to cook something, but the attempt had failed. Rihanna decided to see what he was cooking. It was some kind of concoction. She was pleased, for he was showing her such concern. But he didn't want to be in the smoky room, and the weather was fine outside. She suggested that he go to the village. They walked through the streets. Abel looked around carefully. Rihanna suggested that they work together to find decent land for a temple. Rihanna walked beside Abel and thought to herself, if the day when he would meet St. Lucia was still far away, She would have to do her search here. Since Abel had been banished from Luce, he wouldn't be able to get to the center of the world. But the neighborhood must be explored. Rihanna was cheerfully greeted by a shoe salesman. She really needed a new pair of sturdy shoes for the long journey. The seller asked about Abel. Is he a reaper? When he received an affirmative answer, he greeted Abel with joy. He began to fuss. He had some good sturdy boots in stock that would fit Rihanna perfectly. He finally found them and demonstrated them. Rihanna picked them up and was pleasantly surprised. She liked these shoes and really wanted one for herself. The vendor inquired. Perhaps the Reaper Lord would need a pair as well. But Abel replied that no. He does not pass a day in his new shoes. At last the shopping was done and they decided to move on. Rihanna told them that Mr. Jinin made the best boots in Remn. He was indeed a skilled craftsman, but he was shunned by everyone because of his appearance. And that made him unhappy, for he could not get his abilities recognized. Abel said that all this was very familiar to him. When he was younger, no one wanted to deal with him because of his fighting spirit. When he was a young man, he was shunned by everyone. The other children were simply afraid to touch him, all because of the fighting spirit that emanated from his body. They thought that if they touched him, they would die immediately, and it always made him feel lonely. Rihanna remembered that Abel had such an injury. She didn't want him to be sad, so she tried her best to cheer him up. After all, he has her. Rihanna and Abel decided to set off for Lutza. It was going to be a long journey. They had to be well prepared for it. The priest asked Rihanna if she remembered what disease he had fallen ill with and almost died of. Of course she remembered. The illness had to do with unspoken anger at her son who had run away from home. He asked her if she should see his boy on her journey, to send at least a message. The priest showed her the locket. Rihanna scrutinized the image. Suddenly, a scarlet thread burst out of the locket and connected with her. From surprise, Rihanna dropped it. She didn't understand why the relic was bound to her by a scarlet thread. Did it mean her life belonged to Abel's heart, and his life had become hers? The priest noticed the change in Rihanna's complexion and asked what was wrong. She tried to reassure him that everything was fine. She would try to find his son. She thought to herself that she should find out how they had come to be related to each other. The priest gave an admonition. He advised not to trust too much only what she knew. Fate can change at any moment. That's why there are 3 goddesses of fate. Because in these matters, even with complete perfection, you can't handle everything alone. Rihanna laughed. She had said if she got caught up with the goddess of fate, she would be sure to grab her at least by the collar. The priest added that Rihanna has the power to change others, and surely she also has the power to change destiny. He remembered Abel. He was completely different now from the day he had come to Rem's temple. Rihanna seemed very pensive after her conversation with the spider. Abel noticed this and wondered what the spider was talking about. He also noticed that there was something in Rihanna's hand. Rihanna laughed that it didn't really matter. She was holding an amulet with a prayer for a safe return from her journey. The main thing was to make sure he didn't find out that there was a picture of a man inside the amulet, because Abel wouldn't like that. Rihanna recalled the priest's words about the power within her to change destinies and push back goddesses. And that's right, she won't let things play out the way they did in the original story. And Abel listened to her. Rihanna had a very good feeling. She thought that things would definitely work out well. However, things didn't work out the way she thought they would. Rian was met by Persephone. She immediately inquired about the condition of his arm. He said it was fine. She took his hand and examined it carefully. The hand had indeed healed, and it seemed remarkable. Persephone plucked a hair from his head, blew on it, and a seed appeared. Rihanna immediately asked what it was. Maybe the seed of a bean tree that could grow to the heavens. Yes, that's exactly what it was. Persephone leaned over to Rihanna and told her a secret. That night the Lord Reaper came to him and healed his hand. But he didn't tell her anything about it. Rihanna was pleased. She looked at Abel with a smile. Abel and Rihanna got on Sleipnir and set off on the long journey. She clung tightly to Abel, praising him for helping Persephone. On the way, they came across another village. It was the 10th. Abel said he would go to the temple to talk to the abbots, and she would have to do some searching for a place to sleep. However, Rihanna wanted to go along with him. Maybe there would be patients there who needed treatment urgently. Abel looked at her reproachfully. He'd asked her not to heal anyone else but him, but Rihanna continued to heal. Rihanna had a valid point. They needed to get food and a place to sleep, but it was unlikely that anyone would give them that for free. They needed money, and her trade could bring it. Abel was against her going with him, but Rihanna wouldn't listen to anything. She was sometimes very persistent in her desires, and this time she won. Rihanna was taken to the patients. She started treatment immediately. Only Abel's scowl was really getting on her nerves. Rihanna set about treating the winged horse, but at one point she felt this horse's incredible pain. It was so intense that she had to interrupt the treatment. She was most afraid that Abel would notice her condition, but he stood as if he hadn't noticed. But as soon as she left the room, he immediately noticed her disappearance. Rihanna stepped outside, catching her breath. She didn't understand why it hurt more each time. She had the potion Persephone had given her. She took a few sips. Evening was coming and the sun was setting over the horizon. Abel thought they would have to give up trying to find the village before sunset, and they'd have to camp here for the night. He helped Rihanna off the Sleipnir. They built a fire and sat down beside it. Rihanna kept thinking that something was going wrong. Abel was very different from the man he used to be. Rihanna remembered what was written in the actual book. It said for Asand to wake up from the seal, Nephilim must appear. And it was important that Abel met him first. Rihanna tried not to get discouraged, but it was very difficult to do so. She had to try to find Lucia. However, Rihanna sometimes doubted that it would happen. She even had a whole plan drawn up. First, she had to get close to Lucia, who was having trouble adjusting to the world. Then she would befriend the lonely Nephilim and ask Lucia to give Abel immortality. And after that, the long-awaited freedom would come. The main thing was just to realize it all. Abel brought her out of her deep thoughts. He remembered that she had said that if he became immortal, the threads of fate should break. However, he felt that there was no pressing need to do so. Rihanna jumped in her seat. She thought it was rubbish and needed to fix it. But Abel wasn't worried about himself. He was worried about her. He thought she was going to die because of this. Rihanna even switched to shouting. She said that even if she wasn't the one who could fix it, there would be someone who could, or she would find him on her own. Abel didn't understand why she was so sure of that. She had to pull out in a hurry. She chalked it up to intuition. She stared at his chest where the scarlet thread came out. Abel noticed the look. He grabbed her by the shoulders and wondered what she was looking at this time. Anywhere but at him. Maybe she was thinking about someone at that moment, but who? He wanted so badly to know if for once she looked at him sincerely. She smiled at him and suggested he calm down first. To herself, she thought only of Lucia's savior. He, on the other hand, thought that she was just testing his patience, but that it might break at any moment. He thought she was just pretending. Had she still not realized anything? She knew exactly what he was talking about, but he needed to get closer to Lucia and act like that with her. Not Rihanna. She put her hand out in front of her and pushed him away. I guess that kiss had made him misunderstand. Turning away from him, she mouthed, her greatest desire was to save him. Instead of taking offense at her, Abel leaned over to Rihanna and kissed her. Let her think the same thing about that kiss. Their romantic mood was rudely interrupted. A red-haired man appeared in front of them. He was tossing the golden dice in his hand. He had a case specifically for Rihanna. She realized it was Caesar. His appearance signaled the beginning of the apocalypse. Rihanna asked Abel to get away from him, but they weren't allowed to. They called for Acer. Rihanna should have been taken away. Of course, Abel didn't like all this. Abel drew his weapon. He would have loved to blow the guy's head off, but his weapon hit the gold cube. Caesar needed Rihanna for something, and he wasn't about to let her go. He threatened Abel. If he made just one nod of his head, Rihanna would go to a place unknown to anyone. So you shouldn't act like that. Rihanna begged Abel to stop and offered to listen to what Caesar had to say to her first. He didn't go into details, but he noted that Rihanna was very intelligent. He had heard rumors that Rihanna had a connection to the goddesses of fate and their threads, and he was going to have a hand in them. So she has no other option and will have to go with him. Abel couldn't let her be taken and led away, but Rihanna begged him to stop. This time it was necessary. Caesar was considered the luckiest character in the book. No matter how many times he rolled his dice, he always got a deuce, and his scarlet thread of soul was finer than silk. Caesar said, since there are two of them, you'll have to bring two of them with you. Abel disagreed with that. Rihanna, on the other hand, was more practical. She grabbed Abel and asked Caesar, if they went with him, could they get something in return? Caesar replied that he would probably give her some valuable information, for example about Asanda. Rihanna thought Caesar was watching them. After all, she had been gathering information about Asanda in secret from Abel. Abel wondered who Asand was. It was the first time he had heard the name, but Rihanna knew that where there was Asand, there would be Lucia. She didn't want to explain anything to him now. She said it could be done later. Rihanna looked at Caesar and said that she did need that information, but not to the point of messing with him. Caesar thought her answer was rude, and since that was the case, she should be killed. Caesar gave the order to Asur, who immediately grabbed Rihanna. Naturally, Abel couldn't just stand by. He prepared to attack, wondering which Asura's head was the best place to start. Asur tried to calm him down, or Abel would make his own situation worse. Caesar then offered Abel a wager of life. Rihanna shouted that no, there was no way you could agree to that. But Abel agreed. Caesar picked up the hourglass. Rihanna recognized it. It was the hourglass of Styx. The terms of the wager were that if Abel took Caesar's life before the sand fell, he would win. Otherwise, he would lose. Abel swung his weapons and lunged at Caesar. He wanted to take him and chop him to pieces. However, it didn't work. Caesar had a strong defense. Abel tries again, but it doesn't work. Caesar caused a sandstorm that blinded Abel. Rihanna had warned him of the danger. Caesar stood and smiled. He was the one who had received the patronage of the Lord of Gambling and the God of Probability, and unfortunately for Abel, he was the one who achieved everything. The sand from the hourglass continued to fall. There was hardly any time left to fulfill the bet, and all Abel's attempts were futile. Inside the watch was sand from the bottom of the river Styx. No matter how powerful Abel was, he could not undo the argument bound by that sand. Abel said since that was the case, then he would have to destroy Styx itself. Caesar pulled out a bottle of poison. Abel might destroy Styx, but he and Rihanna would die first. Rihanna noticed that the scarlet thread was growing thicker as of late. She was reacting to Abel's negativity. Caesar turned to Rihanna and asked what answer she would give. She had no choice but to accept his terms. Rihanna helped Abel up. They had to go. Asur opened a passageway for them. Rihanna looked at Caesar with a smile. She was sure he wasn't a true leader, but she asked permission to talk to him later. Caesar confirmed that it was true once again, noting how intelligent this mortal girl was. They were in Dark Age. When Rihanna realized where they were, she knew they were in trouble. This was the lair of the villains, the holy land of the Dark Lord and the Lord of the Apocalypse. They got into the castle. Caesar had to leave them behind, but before doing so, he wished them a successful negotiation. They passed into the Dark Lord's own abode. He looked young. He was a slim and handsome young man with black hair. As they approached him, the Dark Lord said that he had been waiting for her, Saint Lucia, for a long time. It turns out that Rihanna had been watched for a long time, and her skills had been watched. Everything was just as the prophecy said. He knew she was gathering information about Asanda. Surely she wanted to free him from the seal, which was what the prophecy foretold. Rihanna said he was mistaken. According to the prophecy, Saint Lucia should be a blue-eyed girl with hair the color of platinum. But let him look at her. Rihanna had brown eyes and black hair. The Dark Lord replied that yes, her looks did not match. But since the bodily incarnation of the saint slumbers on the constellation Lucia, it is probable that she could have been reborn in another body. Rihanna put a hand to her chest and swore by the river Styx that Lucia wasn't her. But the Dark Lord didn't care if she was a saint or not. He cared about her abilities. He had a plan that he needed Rihanna for. And until that plan came to fruition, she would be under his supervision. Abel covered her with himself as he didn't understand why she should be under the Dark Lord's supervision. The Dark Lord laughed. He knew exactly who Abel was, and he had heard that he had been banished from the temple. Wouldn't he need the souls of the dead to build up his strength? Surely yes, and the apocalypse would be the perfect place for him. Abel shouted that he could take care of his own problems. He was very tired of idle chatter. Rihanna looked at her hand, tied with scarlet thread. It had grown thicker again. When Abel's morale increased, the thread thickened and vice versa. But Rihanna realized with horror that there was simply no way out. In the original story, Abel still gets caught up in the apocalypse. Abel said that if the Dark Lord didn't want it, he didn't have to. He could do it all himself. But soon the Dark Lord would regret it and beg for forgiveness. The Dark Lord rose from his throne. When that time came, he would think about it. Rihanna asked him to make a promise. If the real Lucia showed up, he should let them go. And he also had to guarantee their safety while they were here. And that would apply not only to their lives, but also to the information they had. The Dark Lord agreed and gave his word. When Abel and Rihanna were about to leave the Dark Lord's room, they were stopped by one of his subjects. He had a message for them from their master. He informed them that they would be given a house in the vicinity of the castle for their convenience, and asked them whether one house would be enough for them, or whether different houses would be better. But Abel did not want to let go of Rihanna for a moment. He pinned her down and told her it was dangerous for her to be alone. It would be a terrible waste to give everyone a separate house. Rihanna also agreed that one house would be enough for them and they would live together. They came to the house prepared for them. Rihanna liked it very much. It was bright, large, and comfortably furnished. It stood on a hill between the forest and the river. It had a beautiful view from the windows. Sleipnir showed up. Turns out Dark Age was his homeland. He knew his way around and warned that there were many poisonous plants in the garden. Rihanna was very tired after a hard day. When she saw the huge bed, she jumped on it. She wondered how many people it could accommodate, but she decided to quickly say goodnight to Abel. Abel didn't want to sleep, however. He needed to talk to her. Rihanna pretended to sleep. She guessed what the conversation would be about. Abel was going to finish the conversation that had been started before Caesar and Asur appeared. The next day, Asur came to them. He suggested that they go to field. When the gates of Dark Age were forced open, many black spirits swarmed in, and Abel was partly to blame. But this conversation irritated him. He thought he had nothing to do with it since he had not called himself out. That was why he was not ready to bear any responsibility. However, he asked Asur if he thought this suggestion was not such a bad thing when he should be gathering strength and should be busy reviving the temple. Asur nodded his head affirmatively. Rihanna wondered if she could go with him. She didn't want to sit there shivering in fear of being eaten and captured by monsters in his absence. But Abel said he had taken care to protect her. He's put a barrier around the house that makes sure no one can come and decorate it. And he plans to go alone. Asur inquired if he was ready to move out. Abel stood up and spread his wings, and asked Rihanna to come over. He bit his finger so that blood began to drip from it, and asked that Rihanna swallow a drop of his blood. Rihanna thought Abel had lost his mind. She didn't want to do that at all. Abel was angry. He was going to give her some authority because he was sure that Rihanna was unlikely to stay at home in his absence. She agreed, as she really needed it. But she wasn't going to lick off the protruding blood. She just put her mouth up to get a few drops into it. Abel blushed at first, then got angry. He thought she was just testing his patience. Rihanna, however, was simply afraid to touch him, for if she did, the wound would heal.